So first of all, thank you for having me today. It's exciting and very much appreciate the dinner yesterday as well. I feel slightly out of my depth with the competence in this room as comparison to my own. I will tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. But I was invited today to speak about circularity and how to achieve 100% circularity together, the key word being together. At Stena Recycling, we have been working with waste for the last many decades, but there has been a transition in the last decade where we stopped talking about waste and we talk about resources instead. And that's the journey that I'm going to be talking a little bit about today. So this very high definition picture that I saw on a very big screen all of a sudden, it's from Skellefteå. If you ever go there in November, do not forget your long johns. This is the face of a man who's been out in the cold for way too long, not used to it. I'm the industry manager automotive at Stena Recycling. That means that I'm responsible for our customer segment automotive, and that's basically you. It's suppliers, it's producers, OEMs, as well as the retailers and the service areas for any products within automotive. We also have a very dotted line towards end-of-life vehicles, as well as a dotted line to the mining industry and so on, getting the raw materials out. I started my career working at Stena Recycling approximately 12 years ago, working with one of you. Back then it was administration. It was looking at the invoices being correct. It was about collecting blue containers with some material that we put a price on once every 5 years. Then we started adjusting this price according to some indexes to make sure that we kept our pricing at a market level. That was really it. It was comparing invoices, it was looking at statistics and waiting for the next tender to come after 5 years. And then we worked very hard for 5 years trying to come up with some new processes, some new offerings that we could supply with and stand out in the crowd. But it was still the blue container with material in it. I live with my wife and 2 daughters, twins. Not sure who puts more pressure on me, the buyers at your respective companies or my daughters. I think it's about equal. It's been very good for leadership skills to try to negotiate with 2 3-year-olds to go home from preschool. And getting someone who wants to do something, the swings, to go home and do what I want, which I know is good for the long run. This has proven to be very efficient, also working with my colleagues and our customers, getting everyone to do what's right. Very short about Stena Recycling. As I said, it's been the blue container. We collect the blue container, we drive it away. That's no longer the case. We are participating in certain design processes. It's been known for a long time that the climate impact of a product or a service is determined to 80% at the design phase. This is something that we brought ourselves to help our customers engage with. We understand that a model program for a vehicle is much longer than that of a packaging material. So we started with the packaging material, but now we're slowly transitioning towards the vehicles, and it's exciting. We see that gluing styrofoam to a wooden box, it completely eradicates any possibility for efficient recycling. This we have talked about. We have talked about getting rid of certain logos from waste packaging because it miscolors the plastic. Very easy steps. They shouldn't influence the practicality of the product itself. We then move on to looking at the manufacturing stage. This is what's being done by our customers in terms of waste management. Where are the containers located? How do we mix materials? We've had many cases where we have wastewater being contaminated with different chemicals that could easily be managed on the side. So we try to support in changing certain processes that do not enable efficient recycling. Then we come to recycling, where we are standing, and that's really our area of expertise. This is where we compact material, we separate material, we cut material, we process, we increase the value of the material, we prepare it for the smelters, the end treatment centers, and so on. And what's happened now is really that we're, like I said, we're not looking at waste anymore, we're looking at raw materials. So in certain processes, taking plastics for an example, we now sell raw material. So Stena no longer trades scrap, trades waste, but we process and create a product of our own. So again, it's very interesting to be here, and I'm sure that we're going to see more of Stena within this cluster, because we have our own production. We're creating products out of your waste. But the challenge that we're standing in front of is a sustainability challenge. This, all of you know, this is what the topic has been for the last couple of days, and even decade. Everyone's talking about it now. And we have three main pillars here, and that's the greenhouse gases. We see that these are increasing at an alarming rate. It causes a lot of issues by itself. But we also have a race for material. There will be scarcity of certain materials. And this is not only cobalt, nickel, and so on for the batteries. It's sand. It's the most normal types of materials that we would expect there to be a lot of. But we have to start being smart about it. How do we use the sand? How do we enable for a second use after it's gone through the first processes? And the third issue that we're seeing is the linear mindset. We have full understanding for that one of the most important areas is safety and quality of the products that are coming out of your manufacturing. But we have to start thinking about the next step. What do we do with the material that is coming out not as a product but as a waste? We already need to have a plan for this together. We need to start thinking about cooperation, about partnerships, about the second step of the material. So Stena, what has happened for us since Stena Allan Olsson started in 1939 as a scrap trader. He bought scrap from someone and sold it to someone else. That was it. He didn't do anything with it. We quickly realized that this is very good business. There's a lot to be done here. So we started positioning ourselves geographically next to our customers. So we have our branches that basically serves as the first spot of collection. We bring in material, we put it on a branch that is a few kilometers away from our customers. We scale up the volume and we have effective transports. So we start some ferry operations as well. And then in the last 20 years, we have started scaling up production, meaning that we start looking at not only tens of thousands tons of waste, but hundreds of thousands tons of waste that we can process through rather technical and advanced production lines. The biggest one that we have is in Halmstad. We finally have a big factory. You go in there and you have a little catwalk. You can look down and you see how the different piles of shiny material exist. Reminds a little bit about your own production facilities. Not quite, but almost. So this was the industrial recycling. That means that we can also start talking about what kind of value we contribute with. We're not only connecting A and B, but we're creating value in the middle by processing, refining the material. And the last stage that we're sort of in the midst of now is to be able to explain to our customers what is it that we are doing, and how can you as our customers help us do that better? How can we connect three parties? We connect a supplier with ourselves and then an end treatment center. What do we need to do to achieve that last bit of very critical advancements in using the resources that we are sitting on? And to do that, Stena is currently investing heavily in everything regarding electrification. This is battery production scrap, this is battery recycling, this is battery collection. We're looking at electric engines, we're looking at precious metals, and so on. We are also looking at circular solutions and partnerships. And this is going out of the way. This is looking at one industry and looking how we can utilize raw materials from that in a completely different industry, solving an issue where we have, perhaps in the past, incinerated or even worse, put material on landfill. How can we convince the cement industry to utilize waste from the automotive industry in their production processes? This works, this happens. Sometimes we can even utilize waste to create a product in a completely different area. We work together with the paper industry and Blomsterlandet to create dirt for flowers and so on, taking a problem material and putting it into a product. Lastly, as I mentioned, we have worked a lot with designing, but this has been myself going into a conference room with some of you, telling you how your product is hard to recycle. I don't know the vocabulary. I don't know the right way of formulating myself. I don't have the time to sit and derive a report and so on. So we put together a bunch of smart people with the right background, and we have our own consulting department now that focuses on exactly design for circularity. They focus on production processes that are efficient in terms of managing the raw material. And the very last thing that I wanted to mention is that we sit on so much data that we have kept to ourselves. And we have not even analyzed it ourselves. But we now see that this is key for our customers to make decisions. I cannot come to you and say, oh, when you glue styrofoam to the wooden box, it's not good, without telling you why and show you the data of what would happen if you didn't do it. And this is where CO2 is becoming very valuable to us. We finally have a way of quantifying the different aspects and the movement from A to solution B. So we invested in Stena Nordic Recycling Center. The main cost for this was to recycle a vehicle to 95%. We're currently at 96.2 something. We're working closely with dismantlers. But this is also allowing us to take in so many more complex waste streams. So this is everything from your bicycle that you toss out to an entire car, to other products that are complex, a lot of stuff that is put together. This is only post-consumer, so not so much from your factories. We invested heavily in plastic recycling. Previously, 10 years ago, almost all of the plastics from Europe went to China. They closed down their borders during National Sword, said you cannot export waste to us, you can export raw material. Luckily, we had already planned a little bit for this, and we have the entire process for taking in LDPE, so low-density polyethylene, the shrink wrap, for example. And we sort this, and we go through a production line until a little pellet comes out. This pellet then goes on to be a new plastic bag, for example. So we have the entire process for this. We're also working on sorting hard plastics. So when you eat your little yogurt container and you throw it out in this container that is overly stuffed, and you look at all the plastics and you say, no way that that's going to become a new container. The technology is there. We can finally analyze and sort different plastics from each other. We're looking at 700 different polymers. We're looking at additives, and we're being able to sort more and more of this now. We look at electronics. Cried every time that I saw that a laptop that was 3-4 years old ended up in a container, and we crushed it and we took out some metals and we said, whoa, we got maybe 40 crowns worth of metals out of this laptop. You're looking at the laptop, it's worth 2,500 crowns on Blocket. Why can't we scale on this? Reuse. So we're now working together with our industrial customers of collecting products at our customers, not waste. So we don't want you to throw it into the container and classify it as waste. We want to collect it as a product. And we will tell you what we're going to do with it, how we make sure that no data is there anymore, and we sell it as a product. We need to think of this. Battery Loop. This was a company that was started not to recycle batteries, but to use them as second use. We did a quick partnership many, many years ago that somehow proved to work very, very well together with Volvo buses, with Stena Fastigheter and Battery Loop. The idea is simple. You put solar panels on a building, you put a battery pack that is no longer feasible to use on a bus, in a basement, in a container, and you charge the batteries during the day. When people come home and they start their washing machines and laundry machines and so on, you use the energy that was derived from the solar panels. You don't use brand new batteries, but you use slightly used batteries that still have 80% capacity left. This was during the time where no batteries came in for recycling. There were so few of them, so this was a learning process. But since, we have invested in 7 battery centers. So this is the first stop. This is where we collect a battery that has been damaged, that has run out of state of health, and we ensure that it's completely depleted from electricity. We short-circuit it, and we dismantle it down to cell and module level. The next step, we just opened up. We received our permits. We had a big inauguration now at the end of March. At the end of April, we pushed the start button, a battery recycling center. This is the first step. This is the mechanical recycling. This is where we separate all of the metals from the black mass. We end up with black mass that then has to go to a hydrometallurgical process. But we're doing this. This works. We're getting very, very good high-level materials coming out of this. So we see that the future is bright for lithium-ion batteries. We see that we are achieving the recycling rates that are demanded by the EU and so on. These are harsh requirements as well. But our issue is still that we're sort of working, everyone is taking the responsibility for their low part of the value chain. We still continue working linear, and then we put it on ourselves, Stena, to try to find a buyer for your materials. But we're not really cooperating. We're not truly circular. We recycle a lot of the material, but a lot of the material is still being incinerated. A lot of the material is still being put on landfill. And sometimes when we recycle it, it's very much downgrading. We are not utilizing the alloys in the sheet metal. You pay heavily to receive sheet metal with a lot of manganese in, for example. In my business, it's almost poison. It lowers the price for it. We're not able to utilize it. We can use it for a secondary application where, it's not so important that the quality is perfect. However, the sheet metal that is pure, that is nice, this is gold for us. This is what we want. So we have long ways to go. And what we see in the transition of a linear economy to a circular economy is that not only are we doing less bad, but we're doing more good. We can actually help. If we take the batteries now, we're going to be standing for a challenge for a long time as we're ramping up with volumes in production. There is no recycled material, even though the demand is that we have to use more recycled material. So the mining industry is going to be extremely important. But what happens in 2028, 2030, when we're going to start seeing the big flows of post-consumer batteries coming in, then we already need to have a plan of exactly where this black mass is going to be sent, how we're going to get the different metals and minerals back to the pre-cam suppliers for the battery producers. We need to have that plan, that network established already then. So how do we achieve this more good than less bad together? Stole some pictures from Polestar. Don't know if anyone is here, but I hope it's okay. There's a source, so you can read about it. But what we see from an internal combustion engine car and the footprint during a life cycle is that the majority of the emissions are coming from tailpipe. That's what you guys have been working on, many of you at least, for many decades now, is delivering more efficient internal combustion engines. Remember driving a XC70 and you're driving down the highway and it's consuming 3 liters per 100 kilometers. You're like, wow, this is cool. But what happens when you charge an electric vehicle with wind-powered electricity? You're cutting the emissions by a lot. So we're already down. We have nearly cut the emissions by 50% during a life cycle of a personal vehicle. So what is the next thing that we're going to look at? It's the raw material. It's the black bar here. 17 tons of CO2 during the life cycle. So this is not the waste. This is the material going into the vehicle. The raw material being sent into the vehicle. And these emissions are mainly driven by the batteries, the aluminum, and also the steel. Obviously, we see that this pie graph is changing. We see that a lot more composites are being used. We see that a lot more aluminum is being used. So we see a change in this. But we can already now identify aluminum, batteries, and steel being the areas that we have to look at together. And what we can do together is that we can make sure that we take care of the material that comes from the post-consumer waste, the cars that are already out on the roads. But even easier is taking care of the production scrap that is falling at your facilities now. And making sure that that material is being sent back to a vehicle. It's going to go through a steel mill, it's going to go through a smelter, it's going to go through a compounder, an extruder, and so on within the plastics. But it is possible. But how can we make these decisions together? That's where we saw that the data that we are sitting on at Stena, that we're not sharing with anyone, how far is your material being transported in the first instance? It's going from Tuve to Tingsta, a few kilometers, but then it's going all the way down to Germany. How can we present you with information that will make your decisions easier? How can we in real time present you, this is the CO2 emissions during the waste treatment of today, but if we do X and Y, we could potentially do this solution where we cut emissions by 50%. Logistics is heavy for us. It's a big part of the value chain that we are now recording, measuring, and trying to present. So I've heard that on the 4th of September, there will be a function available through Stena where we can actually display the CO2 emissions throughout the life cycle of waste. So from us collecting material at your site to us delivering it to an end treatment center, let it be a steel mill. So what we're looking at is the inbound transport collection, is the processing refinement, is the outbound transport, and then it's finally the end treatment center. What we really need to achieve together, though, is the full life cycle. What are your processes looking like? What are Stena's processes looking like? And what is the outbound process looking like? And then putting those up to a certain few alternatives. My contacts within your companies and we have for a long time talked about closed loop solutions where the material goes back to the initial supplier. This is good because we can get all the data. We can actually receive all the data in one conference room when we're sitting together. But the question is that always the most efficient? If we're transporting material all across the country or even Europe, then no, probably it's not the most efficient. So what we're looking at is collaboration. What we're looking at is not value chains, but rather value networks. How can we cross several different value chains together and find the optimal solutions? As we see it, we have to start within our supply chains. We have to talk to our suppliers. We have to talk to any service providers, such as recycling service providers. But we have to expand the focus. We have to look past our own value chain. We cannot all the time protect our own material if there is a more sufficient solution. If we look at a few examples, take plastics. Volvo Cars has very ambitious goals, 25% recycled or bio-based plastics. If we just look at the amount of plastic that goes into a vehicle, and we round that down, we say it's about 200 kilos of plastic per vehicle, we say 25% of that. And then we look at 380,000 vehicles being produced in Sweden. All of a sudden, we're sitting at 30,000 something tons of recycled plastics. If we add all of the plastic streams that Stena now achieves, and this is not plastic that is possible to use within the vehicle industry, we're sitting at maybe 15,000 tons as of today. So what we need to do is look at where is the plastic available. We're not going to be able to use the production scrap or the post-consumer scrap of plastic coming from vehicles to fulfill that need. We need to look elsewhere. We need to look at the municipalities, our low yogurt containers. We need to look at retail. We need to look at packaging plastic. We need to look at everything that we possibly can. And then Stena needs to put all the data on the table and say, this is what's available. And then we need to sit together and look at what's possible to use, what changes needs to be done. This is obviously overly oversimplifying things. I know that there's a model program that takes many, many years to derive and so on, but we can start with the packaging going into the factories. We could potentially look at what are the plastic bags, what is the styrofoam, what is all of this material coming when there's a steering wheel being delivered from a supplier, how is that packaged? How can we make sure that those plastics are from recycled character? If we look at batteries, as I mentioned, we're not going to be able to supply the demand for the precious metals, minerals, and so on for a long time. But we can set up the framework, we can set up the guidelines, we can define the partnerships that are needed. Today, we see that mechanical recycling is possible in Sweden. We have it ourselves. We see partners and industry colleagues in Norway, in Finland, and so on. So good news now that Fortum, they've set up a hydrometallurgical plant in Finland. So we are getting there. But the issue is still deciding where's the material going to go after it's been recycled. We sort of need to set up those chains as well already. If we collect batteries from Volvo, somehow we need to have a plan and we need to explain exactly where this material is going to go after. If we look at aluminum, a lot of things are happening. If we look at secondary aluminum, recycled aluminum in comparison to virgin aluminum emits about 7 tons of CO2 per produced ton of aluminum. While secondary aluminum, we're sitting at 1.5 to 2 tons of CO2 per produced ton of aluminum. But what about everything in between? So Stena Recycling now, we're partnering up in the industry, looking at how can we utilize secondary aluminum and mix it with virgin aluminum, throw it through a bunch of processes, and what kind of quality we're getting out from there. The good news is that we're getting very, very good quality out. This is nothing that Stena is doing ourselves, we're doing it with partners. But we are seeing the possibility of actually scrapping a vehicle, sending the aluminum through our Stena Nordic recycling facility, delivering the clean, fresh, nice aluminum back to Stena Aluminum in Älmhult, processing this, smelting it, delivering it in liquid form to Norway, where they make a new form of aluminum sheet metal. We can use recycled aluminum for primary purposes. But all in all, it's all about the partnerships. It's about looking past our own supply chains and value chains. It's about intersecting different value chains and supply chains. This is a challenge, but I feel that with the right data and the right forums, then we're really able to transition to a much more circular economy. And this is not only going to be the closed loop solutions. This is going to be on a macro scale. This will be on a big scale where we all the time use the most efficient methods and processes to deliver recycled materials throughout these networks. And that's actually what I had for you today. Slightly condensed, but I hope it gave a little bit of insights in what we're working with. Thank you.